This week on the channel, we'll be discussing sockets, or powers, or slots, whatever you want to call them. Socketing is one of the 5 main ways to augment your characters, along with leveling up, evolving, giving your units cotton candy, and reducing cooldowns on their specials. Socketing is the most confusing however, since the other ones don't really have a lot of variations or options to decide from. There are 9 different sockets to choose from, so I thought it'd be interesting to look through them all and look at the pros and cons, as well as specific situations you would want them for. But first, let's give a quick rundown on how sockets work and how to obtain them. Units will range between having 0 or 5 slots for powers. Each slot can contain up to 5 points in 1 power, and after that you won't be able to get any more of that 1 power. So for instance, you can't get more than 5 points of bind on each character, even if you have like 5 slots. Units gain powers by either getting fed forbidden tomes, which you obtain through special events such as colosseums or just handouts. You can also get a power when you feed a unit another copy of themselves. It doesn't have to be the exact same character, as long as it's the same character in one piece, then they'll get a power. For instance, you can feed a Gear 2 Luffy to a Log Luffy and he will gain a power. When you have fed your character a tome or a unit, it will then give you one of the 9 random powers. Unless of course you've already maxed one of your sockets, in which case it will give you one of the remaining powers you have yet to max. There are also socket books that just give you a specific power, but these are much rarer. Powers won't activate however until you have enough points into the skill. For instance, reducing bind level 1 costs 10 points. You may have remembered that you only can get a total of 5 points per character, and this is because the totals of your powers will be added up per crew. Therefore, theoretically you could get a total of 30 points in any skill, if all 6 characters had 5 points in a particular skill or power. Therefore, it's important not just to think about what power to give a unit, but what team they will be on, so you don't have too many or too little of one power. Therefore, I don't think there's a set perfect slot configuration for every character, it depends on your situations and teams. So let's go through every power and see when they would be useful and on what teams. We'll be roughly going through worst to best. Since unfortunately sockets weren't created equal, you'll quickly see that some of these are just trash, but sometimes they might be useful, so let's have a look. So first up is the Resilience or Survival socket, which gives you a chance to survive at 1 HP when taking a fatal blow. There are 3 levels of this skill, requiring 5, 10 or 20 points to get to the final level. Now even at level 3, the chance this skill activates is very low, and is way too risky when you're doing stuff like farming raid bosses or colosseum. It's just not viable at all to use this as your defense against dying, as it has such a small chance of activating. I would really recommend never getting this socket, but you know, if you want to live dangerously, get 5 points into it on one character, and maybe you can just cheese through one raid or a training forest, but most of the time this is useless in most situations. Unless you have godlike luck, really stay away from this socket. Next is Negate Poison and Negate Environmental Damage. Though this is 2 different sockets, I'm going to talk about them at the same time because they have pretty much the same pros and cons. Poison has 3 levels, each level increasing the amount of poison that will negate. At level 3, which costs 30, you will negate all poison damage. Environmental damage has 2 levels, and at level 2, which costs 20 points again, you will again take no damage from the environment. Now these in theory are actually pretty good, you know, not taking any lightning damage from a Nell, or not taking any poison damage from a stage that might stop you from stalling, for cooldowns on your specials, or just straight up dying. But the thing is, environmental damage and poison don't really occur very often in One Piece treasure cruise. These sockets will so rarely see use that you might as well have not socketed at all, and keep in mind 20 is a lot of points to not take any damage. That's 4 characters you need to have this socket. And honestly, most of the time the game is balanced to where environmental damage and poison will be a hindrance to you, but won't stop you from completely defeating the boss, where stuff such as Bind and Despair can completely ruin a run. Now if you have a captain that has a lot of slots, say like Croc and Whitebeard, and they don't want to take auto heal because of their captain abilities, because that will heal them above their requirements, then maybe take one of these, but even then there are better options out there. Next up is the Increased RCB socket. This socket has 5 levels, with a max level requiring 25 points, and will make your meat heal you for 1000 more HP. Now on paper this socket isn't too terrible, but it's just outclassed by other sockets. The max level requires 24 points, which is essentially 5 characters having this socket maxed out. That's a huge investment, and while 1000 more HP on your RCV is nice, it isn't going to be game changing. If you're using say a zombie team that requires a lot of healing, usually you bring your own units to have heals, or they have their own captain abilities that heal in different ways not using meat. However, keep in mind that though it says increased RCV, it doesn't actually increase the RCV of your team, but instead increases the amount of HP you heal from meat orbs. Now while that does sound like that's the exact same thing, there are some slight differences. For instance, Raiden heals your team at the end of each turn based on his RCV, which is not increased by this socket. But conversely, Legend Rob Lucci, who sets your RCV to 0, will still heal from meat orbs if you have this socket. This will also be the same situation with, say, the Mihawk boat or units that have negative RCV. Therefore, this socket does have some uses in those situations, but again probably isn't powerful enough for you to opt into using them. Now the socket that makes all the other previous sockets obsolete, the auto heal or recovery socket. This power has 5 levels, similar to the RCV boost, and also requires 24 points to heal you 1000 HP at the end of each turn. Now as you can see, this does the same job as the previous sockets, but activates every turn, and it's useful in every situation. Rather than having to wait for a meat orb or being in a situation where you're poisoned or taking environmental damage, you just heal every turn. Like, it's just straight up better. It also gets better the longer the stage is, since you'll be healing more over time, so it is very powerful for training forests. It also only costs 5 to get the first level, so if you have units that only have 1 slot, since they'll just give you 100 HP heal, regardless of what team they're on. Again, on teams with reduced healing such as Legend Rob Lucci or Mihawk Boats teams, you also have a way to heal since meat orbs are no longer in the equation. This is just straight up one of the best sockets to get, and if you have a chance to, you should grab it onto most teams. Put it onto units that only have 1 slot, and units that have usually more than 3, and even if they only have 2, in most cases it's probably fine to get auto heal. Up next we have damage reduction, which at 15 points will reduce the damage you take by 10%. This one is pretty straightforward and does what it says on the tin. It's not a terrible socket, the level requirements for it aren't too high at 15 for max, but again seems overshadowed by auto heal. With just 1 extra point to have 16 points in auto heal, you'll heal 500 damage a turn, so you have to take more than 5000 damage to see a bigger benefit for 1 turn. Now obviously if you were going to die from the hit, then 10% damage reduction is better than healing when you're dead, but really 10% isn't big enough to make a huge difference. The only real cases to take this over auto heal is when you're using a captain that has a HP requirement, such as Whitebeard, who requires you to be below 30% HP. Having auto heal will probably heal you over the 30% and mean that he won't be doing any damage, and therefore damage reduction might be better in that case. But even so, that means you would have to get 10 points somewhere else on your team as well. So unless you're forced to and have those specific captains that have HP requirements, usually don't take this power. Next up is probably the most powerful socket, cooldown reduction. It only has 2 levels, but level 2 requires 20 points to reduce your skill cooldowns by 2 at the beginning of the fight. Keep in mind that after you use your special, it will have its base cooldown rather than the reduced one, but still this is very powerful. One of the most important things to do in One Piece Treasure Cruise is reducing the cooldowns of your specials, so having all your specials reduced by 2 at the beginning of every fight is very good. This is obviously very useful in most situations, but especially during raids where you only have 5 stages to stall for specials. One of the few drawbacks of course is that it costs 10 or 20 points, so anything in between is just a waste, so you have to plan your teams carefully to have this certain amount of points. Therefore I think it's better to have it on units that have a lot of slots, or units that have very few slots but you'll know you'll be using them on specific teams. For instance, if you put 5 cooldown slots onto GPU, who you'll be using on a lot of teams, there'll probably be a lot of times when your team isn't fully socketed and those cooldown sockets are going to waste when you could have had auto heal instead, or maybe even bind. That said, whenever you can get it, cooldown reduction is not going to be a bad choice. Next up is the increased orb matching power, which maxes out at level 3 with 20 points. This is another socket that only requires 5 points for level 1, so it is another candidate for your units that only have 1 slot. However, I still do think auto heal is usually better in those situations. If you think of getting matching orbs as a critical hit in other RPGs, this socket is increasing your critical hit chance, or the chance to deal twice the damage. So this is a pretty good power to go for. I especially like it on teams where the captain has an extra boost when you have a matching orb, such as Legend Rob Lucci or Legend Stronghold Ace. Having this power will allow you to use your captain ability to its maximum potential a lot more often, making clears on stuff like Fortnights in story mode a lot more efficient, but you cannot rely on it to be your main source of getting matching orbs, since the increased chance still isn't that high, and you'll see some diminishing returns on captains like Stronghold Shanks that already increase the matching orb chance. So while I think it's a pretty good power to have, it should be seen more of a little boost to have rather than a game changer. It may help you clear some content faster, or may give you just enough orb luck to beat something once, but again shouldn't be relied upon. Grab it on units that either have only 1 slot or if they have 4 or 5. And the last two are Anti-Despair and Anti-Bind. Both have 3 levels and max out at 20 points. These two are usually my go-to powers for which units have 2 or more sockets. These are the 2 most common status elements in the game, but Bind is a little bit more common, so if you have to choose between the 2, go for Bind. Now while I have grouped them together because they do similar effects, Bind is usually better for a lot of reasons. For one thing, Bind can affect all units, while Despair can only affect the captains. And while both can be removed by specials, if your Bind reducer is bound themselves, you're going to be screwed. While losing your captain ability is obviously a big blow, when someone is bound you're also losing their special, chain multiplier and damage. Having only 1 level in Bind is also usually enough, since a lot of times the turns they are bound will match the attack cooldown of the enemy. While this is also usually true for anti-despair, if you're using a HP boosting captain, when you are despaired you will lose the HP boost when they are despaired, and you will not regain the lost HP when the despair is gone. However, if you have enough despair resistance that you don't get despaired at all, you will keep the HP boost. So while bind is better and you should usually prioritize that, both are very powerful and will be used in a lot of situations. So for a quick summary, orb matching and auto heal are usually very good for 1 slot units, since they will be activated at 5 points. Cooldown reduction is probably the best overall socket, but be careful when building your teams to not have too much or too little of the points. When a unit has only 2 slots, usually max out bind and either orb boosting, auto heal, despair or cooldown reduction. And if your unit is lucky enough to have 3 to 5 slots, grab anti-despair and anti-bind and then a mixture of orb boosting, cooldown reduction or auto heal. Again, these are just general guidelines. It's very important to look at what teams you'll be building to have enough points and what situations you'll be using these teams in. So I wish you the best of luck getting those sockets. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment and subscribe. There'll definitely be a lot more One Piece Treasure Cruise content coming up. Next week will be a top 10 Legends update video, so you can finally see what the fans voted for as the best legends in the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, my nakama!